Shawn A-in-chut Ahousaht First Nation Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, Machinopsic, Matikitsu. I joined the Deputy Mayor in acknowledging that we're here in beautiful Coast Salish territories. I'm home on the West Coast. My village of Ahousaht, the New Chonolth, is not far from here. The house that I come from is called the House of Dlakishbeat. And I really appreciate all of the words that have been spoken. Humbled to be invited to offer a few thoughts. Thankful that the voices of Indigenous peoples, both here and around the world, are being included. We are making progress on the long journey, and it's something that I feel very thankful for. I feel very hopeful. Indeed, I share the enthusiasm and the optimism of our future. Indigenous peoples have and will continue in an increasing way help shape the energy space around the world. We are doing so now, even if many aren't aware of exactly how we're doing it. Indigenous peoples, such as those where I come from here on the west coast of Vancouver Island, the New Chonolth, we're one of 32 language groups just in BC, one of 52 in Canada, one of thousands from around the world, and we're one Indigenous peoples of the approximately 400 million Indigenous peoples globally. And I would suggest that we are in the age of Indigenous peoples. Here in Canada, we have been fighting. This is work that I myself have undertaken. We've won 170 court cases. Very often, those were court cases that were standing in front of and against major resource project developments. I remember in 2005, when I was in the Assembly of First Nations as a regional chief, Natural Resource Canada said, there are about 6 to 8 billion projects in Canada that implicate Indigenous peoples. I knew one project in my village that was proposed at 8 billion, so we had a significant disconnect in 2005. Those numbers have been rightfully updated to 600 to 800 billion. Projects in Canada that are implicated or connected where First Nations will have a say. And this is a global phenomenon, which is why I suggest that global peoples are in a renaissance. This is the age of Indigenous peoples. The story of advocacy and activism has led to the recognition of our rights in the United Nations, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the recognition of the right to free, prior, and informed consent. I had opportunities to be involved in those talks in New York and Geneva, connecting my experience in my little village, my little fishing village here on the west coast of Canada, with Indigenous peoples globally. These stories are mostly ones of rejection and opposition. Often the only way for Indigenous peoples working alongside, in most cases, environmental non-government organizations who would stand with us in our response and are certain that you must have the consent of the Indigenous peoples in whose territories you're proposing to do your work. I've paddled the Peace in northern British Columbia on the Site C. I've taken a flight with James Cameron to northern Alberta, stood with those in the Atlantic coast who were in opposition to energy developments and fracking in that part of the country. Indigenous peoples, both here in Canada, around the world, standing firmly in their values, values that I would describe here in my language, Umatsikwatasnish, Hishuk Ish Tsawak. We are all one. We are all interconnected. Our peoples, we view this conversation through a lens of which we have many stories that go back a long way. We hear them from the Squamish and Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh tell us about the stories of these lands right underneath the feet of those of us gathered right here on the shores of the Pacific Ocean. And for me on the West Coast, these phrases about interconnectedness come with e-sockstat, umatsikwatasnish, ya-akstat, klawa-istat, words that describe the requirement, in fact, for us to respect, be kind, indeed to love one another, to recognize and see each other. I've heard terms such as co-creation, which we recognize as being a requirement. And what must come with that is also that it must also be with mutual respect and full recognition, in this case of the rights that Indigenous peoples have fought so long and hard to have affirmed. So I share a short story, because we should have at least one, of bear. You see, there was a time in my village here, you can imagine, when our people, the humans, were suffering for food. And so we innovated. We created a weir so that we could harvest in a sustainable way the energy for our bodies and our spirits. And the weir got created, but every time we went to check it, it was damaged and the fish were getting through, and oh my goodness, we had to investigate what was happening. So man stood behind the tree and watched what happened, and sure enough, there came bear, powerful and big and hungry, getting the fish that was bountiful in this weir that our people had created, took it off into the bush. And so the human had to take the opportunity to overcome some significant fears and went and had a conversation with bear. Do you know what you're doing, taking all this fish? Our people are going hungry. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what it is that I'm doing, bear said. My people are hungry too. Let me show you. So we offered to take the human, who agreed, even though maybe scared of this powerful bear, and off they went into the bush, over many mountains, too far, in fact, for the human to be able to walk. So the bear put the human on his back and carried him the balance of the way. Arriving at the village, bear took off his fur, his outer layers, and brought the human to meet the chief of the bear people. And a long story short, you can imagine it would take more than 7 minutes to tell this story. They arrived at an accord, a protocol, a treaty, which is what our people have always done with the living environment around us. And in the conclusion, they learned to see each other, respect that each other had needs and in fact would suffer periodically. And they arrived at a sharing agreement, a protocol, a treaty over how we would use the resources in that river. You see, it required vulnerability to achieve this innovation of sharing. It took both seeing each other in new ways. It required feeling safe. Bear offered up what Einstein had taught people later, that we can't solve old problems with the same consciousness that created it. And so Indigenous peoples here, of which I'm only one, coming from a small community on the West Coast, our peoples are taking our rightful place in our respective territories. And we're offering encouragement that through our language and through our stories and through the wisdom of the elders, that we can and must dare greatly together. It requires the willingness to see one another and true vulnerability, that at times we have to carry each other on one another's back. And that's scary. And so, yes, we must move with great haste. We must also do so with great caution, with much respect, and I would suggest with great love. This will require our future, that of co-creating, as we've heard here today, with Indigenous peoples as knowledge holders, as title holders, as full partners. A new economic and energy model is emerging. It's being shaped by Indigenous peoples with understandings of reciprocity, of regeneration, of respect, anchored in recognition. By daring greatly together, we're reimagining our relationship with our environment and the resources that we share. So just as Bear taught us, this is filled with hope. This is for our kids, and this is for our grandkids. This is our future. Chuauna, tleko, tleko.